Hey guys, Marcus back here with the Career OS podcast. Today, we're really excited to be joined with Bartek and Juan Carlos. The three of us are really going to dive in to Bartek's experience at the Said MBA program there in London. So, Bartek, thanks for joining us. Maybe tell us a quick bit about yourself.
Yeah, cool. No, thanks, Marcus and Juan, for having me today. Really good to see you both. A bit of experience. I know we're going to dive into a few more questions, but my name's Bartek Ogonowski, originally from South Africa. Currently find myself in the sunny, believe it or not, London, after having finished an MBA at the Said Business School in Oxford. And I finished that in September 2022. And now I've pivoted into an entrepreneurship role, which I'm happy to share, but a few more details later. Cool. Pleasure to be here
Nice,
with you
welcome.
today.
Awesome to have you.
And yeah, I'm Carlos, also from Esare MBA, right now doing the global MBA program from BBVA. Bartek, I must say it's an honor to have you here. Quite a rock star in Oxford. I see you. I see you singing in graduation, giving speeches, and we're happy to know more about your startup and how you've been doing about your after your MBA, and tell us more about your experience. I think
Yeah,
this
I
will
think
be quite an interesting podcast with the three of us.
cool.
Awesome.
Thank you for that.
Well, Bartek, great to have you. I think maybe we can kick things off. Just tell us maybe a bit more about your experience before the MBA. Maybe what led you to do an MBA. I think sometimes folks look at, okay, you're in South Africa. What made you excited to do an MBA? So just spend a few minutes, maybe just sharing your path and what led you to London to Said.
Yeah, awesome. So I was at Deloitte for about 7 years. I studied accounting and went down the chartered accountancy route. A very set, structured life or program at that stage. Brilliant experience, and I stayed on for a while. And after my articles in South Africa, you've got to qualify as a CA before you,
Mm-hmm.
for 3 years before you become a manager, or if you want to stand as a manager. So I lived that lifestyle for about 7 years. Amazing experience. But towards the end, I really realized that, it's kind of like my learning seems like it had plateaued a lot. And I wanted to do a bit more in terms of like making a bigger tangible impact on society. Um, and I really was always passionate about the education space. And really, I started thinking about the MBA a couple of years before I did it, and like how that could pivot my mindset from really a corporate one into more of like this entrepreneurial risk taker one. Because as you know,
Mm-hmm.
in the auditing world, it's all about addressing risk and managing risk.
Managing
And
risk.
and and now I'm going to this world where it's like, well, I'm going to take the biggest risk of my life and like go into an MBA and leave the comfort zone of my well-paying job and security of South Africa to do it. So I was ready to be pushed out of my comfort zone. I wanted to explore. I wanted to explore my mindset. What else is out there in the world? And that was really when the seed was planted. After Deloitte, I was going to go straight to the MBA. As we all know, the pandemic hit us in different ways, and
Yep.
I actually deferred my MBA place, which in hindsight was probably one of the most important decisions I made in my life professionally. That allowed me to, not be fully virtual during the MBA because, as we know, the whole experience is
Wow.
about
Mm-hmm.
meeting people and the
Yep.
networks and the trips, which we'll talk about in a bit, I'm sure. And in that year, I actually left Deloitte and was hired at a startup called I Talk to You, which was helping people work from home during the pandemic as call center agents. And that really gave me like this first experience into entrepreneurship, which I
Mm-hmm.
completely fell in love with. And then my sole vision, or like my goal of the MBA, was really to then, you know, break away from corporate, really had this like 9 month stint into entrepreneurship, but a bit of more of a protected environment, and now go into this fully entrepreneurial world and like just getting my mind open to as many things as possible. So that was the reason why.
So I think it's an interesting story because you went from, like you said, managing risk, and then doing side into the MBA, but also doing a startup, which is I would say the opposite of maybe managing risk, right? So
Yeah,
Martin,
no, but
was it the process, or why did you choose Oxford among all the universities in Europe?
yeah, no, good question. I mean, there's some awesome schools around Europe. There's some awesome schools in the States. I mean, you can look at different rankings, different blog posts, different whatever. I think for me particularly, I had like a bit of criteria which I wanted. I knew I wanted to be in Europe, similar time zone to South Africa. I knew I wanted to do a 1 year program, not taking 2 years out of the sort of workflow and workforce, to do it hard, to do it fast, to do it like give 100% in that year. And I kind of was looking between LBS and Oxford. I'd lived in London before in 2017 and was a bit more familiar. When I started exploring Oxford more, and what really helps is actually speaking to alumni and speaking to people that have done this before and understanding, like, Oxford's or Said Business School has a big focus on Africa, which really attracted me. They like to invest in African talent and African business. You've now got an institution which is 1,000 years old, or thereabouts. And probably every great inspirational leader has had some association to Oxford, whether it's a lecturer there or an honorary degree. I mean, I know the Said Business School, the main lecture theatre is called the Nelson Mandela Lecture Theatre. And in my first day sitting there, looking up and seeing like Nelson Mandela and like a boy from South Africa seeing this, I felt like, I even get shivers when I talk about it now. So I remember that feeling of like, this is an inspirational person. And I'm walking the same corridors that this, greats like Mandela, Stephen Hawking, Mother Teresa, we're all like there in Oxford in some capacity. It's very inspiring. So that's the second reason. I think also access to the wider university. Why I chose against going to London and London Business School is that I didn't want to get caught up in the London lifestyle. And the moment I leave business school, I go out to my other friends and kind of don't create a relationship with the MBA students. I wanted to be in Oxford, fully immersed into the university town and give it my all and make those friendships and solidify them, which really did happen. And I guess access to wider university sports and cultural activities. I played golf for Oxford, which was amazing.
Oh, amazing.
Like playing Oxford versus Cambridge was like a dream. Like I was putting on the 17th hole for like the win of the match. And I was like, what is this? What world am I living in? So just, I think just opened your doors to different experiences, which I don't think I never had. So,
Bartek, I think one thing that you mentioned that I've heard some maybe, pre-MBA students do and some don't do, but I think one thing that's really important is you mentioned speaking to alumni, right? So you actually spent time probably talking to alumni, how about their experience from maybe London Business School and Said. Maybe tell us a little bit more how you did that. Was that just cold outreach? Did the university help you in those introductions? Just tell us maybe how you were able to connect with alumni before the MBA and that experience.
Okay, the MBA is a big decision. It's financially, it's a big commitment. You take in a year out of your life, or sometimes 2 years, depending on which school you're going to. It's something that you've got to do a proper due diligence of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And particularly coming from managing risk mindset. I mean, my process went back a few years before, where I was speaking to friends that I knew had done the MBA, and I still remember making handwritten notes and asking practical questions, people that you're a bit more comfortable with. Things like, how does a typical day in the life of an MBA look like? Or what actually goes down and what is the purpose? And have you seen the true value? Because, of course, you're going to get people that haven't done MBAs to challenge the value of an MBA. And is it really worth it? Can you just do this online trainings? And so I really try to approach friends first, and then they put me in contact with their friends, and then they put me in contact with friends of friends. And I really try to speak to a good number of people without getting too many views, because that's also, information asymmetry, but just trying to understand from a good handful of people which schools they were at, why those schools, and particularly Oxford. And there was 2 alumni in particular that really helped me along the journey, both South Africans that I'd worked with at Deloitte. And they kind of just not sold it, but I was so certain on Oxford that at that point that I knew it. I just knew I'd applied to another school in Europe as almost a backup. I don't want to mention names because I don't want to sound patronizing in any way, but I did apply to another school as a backup, which I got in with a scholarship option. And when I got into Oxford after that, without a scholarship option, but that was my dream. So it was a no-brainer to go.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that, man. And during the WeMBA experience, and part of why we picked you is that we identified you as a leader within Oxford. And we were able to see that during the trip, how people approach you, how you helped us so much in convincing people to go. Do you think you developed those leadership and social skills during the MBA, or were they exponential growth during the MBA, or you had them before the MBA?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of both. So inherently, I am a very positive person. I, particularly post-COVID and realizing how fragile life is, and how short your time on this earth is. And Juan, as you know, like I'm always out there to just make like the most of that situation, embrace it, even if it's shit, even if it's like, whatever, like embrace that time for what it is and make the most of that situation. And that was always my mindset, kind of seeing the fun in it and the bigger picture. I guess the MBA, what that helps with is that it really gives you now this global network and these global leaders. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there like with this imposter syndrome of like, I'm just a small boy from South Africa. I'm
We're
sitting
all
in
there,
the
man.
room. Everyone's got this imposter syndrome. Once you start talking about it, I still remember that feeling the first day. I'm sitting in this room. I just come from COVID, and South Africa had pretty strict lockdown rules. I had to do like a 10-day quarantine, whatever the case may be. I get to Oxford. We're now sitting in a room with like some people with masks, some people not. And everyone's like introducing themselves, and it's like Olympic athletes and opera singers and investment bankers and like Wolves of Wall Street and like, just like amazing. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be tough because now everyone around here has got a brilliant CV. Everyone around here has got amazing credentials. They were top rated. They were first team sports. They were confident in whatever the case may be. It's like, okay, well, how now do I manage this? And how do I actually like try to differentiate myself in a crowd of like leaders, in a crowd of like ambitious people? And it's just bringing your own personality to the table. It's just bringing what got you to that point and just amplifying it a little bit more, but not changing who you are. So I think it's a bit of both. I mean, it's a much more intimidating group to portray those leadership skills on, but I'm always the kind of person who puts my hand up. I was the student life officer and got voted into that role. I was always, putting my hand up, getting involved in all like in trips and societies, and made sure I was always getting involved in lectures and trying to learn and absorb as much as I can, and all the talks and the dinners. So it was a very full-on schedule. And I guess in life, you've got to be physically present and you've got to be there for people to notice. Otherwise, it's a constant treadmill. And if you get left behind, that treadmill's going to kick you off, and you have to get back on and start running again. Otherwise, it's not going to happen for you.
Nice, man. I think it's a pretty interesting combination of having a genuine, authentic personality that people feel naturally attracted to, and also given the context of having an MBA during COVID, that you were always seeing the positive, the glass half full, the bright side of life. That people will be like, okay, this is a nice guy. We're all quite nervous and not sure if we were making the right decision of studying during COVID. And that pretty highlighted, and I was able to see that. I remember your best friend is from Costa Rica, which is quite crazy. Small word.
Yeah.
I hope you say your best friend is from Costa Rica too.
always. No, I think it's cool to hear that you really took the leadership role of the experience, which I think is super important, right? I mean, one of the big things about doing an MBA is that experience. So maybe tell us a little bit more about your specific site experience, maybe some of the highlights that you experienced, maybe some of the events that you put on. So maybe just dive in a little bit more on the site experience and some of the highlights.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's tough to summarize it into a few minutes.
Almost impossible.
It's almost impossible because I could probably speak for a year because every moment felt like a brilliant time. But in summary, basically, it was a lot of good trips. So I remember being on the ski slopes of Val Thorens with 50 MBA students and like skiing down together and doing like après ski. I mean, insane. We did a trip to South Africa. We actually took 25 students from MBA from 18 different countries. And we did a 2-week trip to Cape Town and to the Kruger National Park and to Joburg. And having these like really good friends, seeing my hometown and like meeting my families and friends was incredible. Like conferences that we went on. I mean, there's something called the MBAT, which is like the MBA Olympics, which Oxford won. I must just put that out there.
I remember.
And it was like just fun. I mean, it's like, obviously it's all healthy competition and you look back and it's all a big laugh. But that element of like each of their business schools going together and formulating a team and like for once fighting that case where they're actually like, going as a school, trips to Belgium for friends' farms, trips to like music festivals in Budapest, like So I'm talking like a lot of other stuff, but that's the overall experience. Within the school itself, we had like great events to bring the community together. We had 71 different nationalities. And I guess the overall purpose was to bring as many of those nationalities together to feel welcomed, to feel at home. We had like an NBA ball, we had drinks, we had quiz nights, whatever the case may be, and just trying to create that sense of community. As mentioned, I also did like the SBS podcast, like Future of Business. I was a host there. So it's quite good to be on the other side now. And like, it's quite interesting. I was a student life officer. I played golf for Oxford. Like every day was just like a crazy, crazy busy schedule and it's non-stop thing. So, as you can hear, my mind's racing and trying to sum it all up, but yeah.
What was the average? Well, like maybe just tell us what was a day like? I mean, I know they always change, but in general, what do you think like the average day looked like as a student at Said?
Well, a student or like my life in Said, because it's very different.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I mean, I think I'll take you through a typical day, and when I think back to it, sometimes I'm like, how did I manage this for a year? But let's say, like, usually classes started at 9 a.m. So it would be, luckily I live pretty close to school or the business school. So wake up, do a bit of pre-work, read in, have some breakfast at home, kind of get to school just before 9. Although I was 2 minutes away, I'm always like, rushing into that last, leaving it, it's a 120-second walk, but I had 115 seconds to get into the class. Just right in it. Always been attentive in class, making sure I like being well read for the readings. Otherwise, it's a complete waste. Being fully engaged in those conversations. A lot of the materials you can watch a YouTube video on it, but actually engaging with the people was good. So lectures were most of the day. Usually at lunch, I'd booked a meeting with people from either my study group or people from different countries, which I hadn't sort of fully immersed myself with yet, which I wanted to learn about. Lectures usually went on till 3, 4. On a Wednesday, like let's just call it a Wednesday because it was a really particularly busy day. I'd head to golf practice. I'd have golf practice from 4 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. I'd come back. I'd do a bit of like work or a bit of prep for that evening. That there's probably a formal dinner that night where I had to dress it like a tuxedo and my subfusk and rush to a college which I'd be invited to for dinner that night with friends. You sit in, you engage, and you meet students from around the university. You're having a glass or two of wine. Afterwards, you end up at a friend's birthday, which is somewhere at a bar. You get it, you're having a few drinks, you're getting to know each other more. And then you get back at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning and you say, gee, I actually need to do that. I need to do some stuff for tomorrow morning that's quite urgent. And you end up sleeping at 3:30 and waking up again and the cycle starts. And it's like this crazy, constant, busy, churn.
Never stops,
amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's actually, it relates into something really, really, I think, important maybe to current students or maybe prospective students, right? The MBA experience, I mean, we, Juan Carlos, went to ISADE. It was very, very similar. Barcelona too. You have a lot of temptation with nightlife and everything plus school. But a lot of people, and I'd say just about everyone, you do the MBA journey to help leverage your career, right? So you're doing it to learn, professionally, personally, but obviously to get the next job or maybe entrepreneurship, whatever it is, but it's to take this next step. So one question would be is, how crazy that day was. How did you, and I would say also your other classmates at Said, sort of navigate this career journey? And then maybe specifically go into, your journey, how the MBA helped you progress to where you're at now, and tell us a little more of what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a multi-dimensional question, and I think there's a lot of aspects to it. So people come into the MBA for different reasons. And I still remember one of our first weeks, we had to kind of put ourselves into different categories. Are you an explorer? Are you an accelerator? Are you something else? I'm kind of saying, like, are you doing this to get higher in your company? Are you doing this to like do the double or triple jump, to completely pivot? Are you doing this to kind of like have an experience and figure it all out? And I kind of find myself into the more like explorer phase, because although I did want to do something more entrepreneurial doesn't always mean you go start a startup. I mean, there's different aspects of entrepreneurship that you can get involved in. And I always had these 3 bubbles in my mind, very consulting type approach, but I had finance, which is kind of like what I knew and what I'd done. And but maybe looking more to like, a a VC or private equity route. Then you've got entrepreneurship, which is links to VC and maybe your own startup. And then more on the other end, which is like more cultural and like fun. And like, if you had to ask me, what is your ultimate dream job? And I challenge both of you to think about it too. Like, if I had to give you a piece of paper and say, write your ultimate dream job on this piece of paper. If you get it right, I'll give you $1 million every day for the rest of your life. I would write a rock star or a Hollywood actor or something like on stage and presenting, and like, and that's like where really my passions lie. And where my thinking started going towards in the MBA is like, okay, there's also reality. And you also got to think of realistically, how can I get as close to that North Star or guiding star as possible without being too like head in the clouds? And that's where I guess you say, okay, well, if I do investment banking, how does that have anything to do with like where I want to eventually be in my life? And like in the short life where you've got such limited time and such short times to make these decisions, that's not going to help. Okay, if I go back into like an audited career, that's like going completely against where Bartek needs to be from his North Star. So for me, it's like, okay, where I currently am, and we'll talk about Levra in a bit, which is the startup we've launched, it's helping people communicate. It's helping people present better. And throughout this journey, I am on stage, I'm presenting, I'm selling my business, I'm like going to companies, I'm teaching them how to speak better. I'm starting to incorporate elements of like motivational speaking and like those kind of things, which is sort of like on the route of like where eventually I want to get to. And, in 10 years time, someone like a Simon Sinek, as an example, that like he's built up businesses, he's got that mindset, he can be on stage, he's got that presence and he can talk. And like, that's a rock star in a way. I'm not going to like play Coldplay and be a musician, but in that way, you're doing something that's closely aligned to where your North Star is. So that year of the MBA really gave me the opportunity to think and to actually, I didn't have to answer back. At Deloitte or in companies, you always have to have an answer. You're always on the go. You're always busy. And in this case, of course, I was busy. I just told you a typical day, which sounds crazy. But you actually buy the ability, you buy the gift of time, which is so important. You buy the gift of being able to think about your next decision. And that led me into this way. Like, I feel like I've completely gone to the place where I need to be. And of course, there's going to be stresses and a lot of admin and a lot of doubts and stuff. But it's closer towards where I know I want to go. And without the MBA year in general, guess wherever you are and who you're thinking, but my mindset has completely shifted into a really good and structured approach of how I'm going to get to that where Bartek deserves to be, and what I promised to myself in my mind.
Nice,
man. Yeah. And do you think a lot of that was, getting out of your comfort zone, moving away from your home country, going to a whole new, country surrounded by people from all over? Do you think that was the leading driver? Or maybe also talk about how maybe the careers or the team at Said also helped, leverage those connections with everyone to help push maybe you out of the comfort zone to start thinking about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a saying, and it sounds cliche, and you've all heard it, but life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And I still remember, my mom actually bought me a diary in 2017 when I moved to London for the first time and moved away from like South Africa. And it had that on the front. And every day when I was writing my notes, it always like, just always resonated with me. And it really does. I honestly believe that the bigger you make your comfort zone, the bigger you make your networks, it just, it's like the analogy of training. Like you go to gym, you pick up 5 kilograms the first few weeks and it feels tough. And I'm just using random numbers. Then it's 6 and then 7 and then 8 and then 15 and then 20. And all of a sudden you're like, you look back at 5 and it's like, how was I even doing those weights? And that's the same mindset of training your comfort or yourself to get into more of a comfortable state. So absolutely, I was thrown into this deep end, and I'm very extroverted. I'm usually comfortable in like any social setting you put me in. But the MBA particularly does challenge you. Those first 2 weeks, I was like, this is hectic. Like, how am I going to do this for like a year? But you learn, you grow, you become more comfortable. And all of a sudden, you can interact globally, which is such a beautiful skill. So absolutely, that element of creating your comfort zone bigger is such an important task, which I challenge everyone to just do whatever it may be, but keep pushing yourself to that comfort zone to expand it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Juan Carlos is another great example, going from Costa Rica to now, Barcelona to Madrid. Now he's in Colombia, working for BBVA. I think. Yeah.
Never been in Europe, so as Bartek was saying, just imagine a small kid from Costa Rica sitting in a class in Barcelona, and everybody's like super investment bankers, super entrepreneurs. I'm like, oh my god, I'm the dumbest guy in the room, and I think luckily I was not. I have a question for both of you guys. I think now that I hear Bartek speaking, you two have a lot in common, and I'm quite sure Levra and Career OS can have some synergies. Hope you two talk in the future. But what's the best and the most challenging part of being an entrepreneur? You can start in which order you want.
Do you want to go ahead, Marcus?
I can hit it. So I think there's a lot of challenges. Bartek could probably agree with me. There's a lot of ups and downs. I think for me, one of the biggest challenges is, being a founder. Sort of, you have to be a little bit crazy and ambitious to go do this, right? I mean, and I think that's part of it. There's no structure, right? I mean, there are some frameworks about startups and entrepreneurship, but nothing is one size fits all. So when you start this journey, it's pure chaos, right? You don't know every day. It's like, okay, what do I need to do today that's going to have the biggest impact? And there's no one really to tell you what that's going to be. You know your business, you know what's going on. And so you always have to make, throughout the day, 10,000 decisions on, hopefully they're the right ones to push what you're doing forward, right? So you're always trying to push it forward one nudge at a time. And this is a challenge because you don't know if it's the right nudge or not. And you have to make guesses about sort of what process you should do, what the best value of your time is. So I think that's one of the maybe more difficult parts about entrepreneurship, is really figuring out your priorities and always pushing toward those priorities, and don't let other things distract you along the way.
And the best.
Good.
Yeah. You can also the best. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the best thing is, every day you wake up, and sort of the same thing, right? You don't know what your day is going to look like. There's always something new popping up, right? So maybe one week you're working on something with trademarks. The next day you're recruiting someone to do this alongside you. One day you're talking to, prospective customers, right? So you're always doing something new and different. But the exciting thing is, like, it's your baby, it's your thing, and everything new you're doing, you're learning along the way. So you're always learning. So I think just like the MBA, you sort of get out of your comfort zone and you learn like crazy. I think once you do the MBA and you decide to do this entrepreneurship path, it continues this really steep learning curve every single day, which I think is an exciting thing.
Well answered, Marcus. I mean, I completely resonate with that. And I think I'll try to take a different approach. I think particularly for me, coming from 7 years in corporate and Deloitte, and always having like a stability of income and a stability of like where my life was going, and a good safety net. Probably the biggest challenge is that fear, or to overcome, is that fear of failure, because I think people have that inner critic, that voice of like, you can't, this isn't going to work, or like, is this really going to work? Or you're spending so much time and effort, like, what are you doing? Like, people are making decent paychecks around you. But then it's going back to that, like, why are you actually doing this? What is the overall motivation? And what actually is the biggest risk? Like, the biggest risk is that it fails, and you've always got, your comfort zone's here now. You can go down. You can always go down a level. It's hard. It's always hard to push out, but it's this risk of failure. I mean, and startups are very hard. It's a million times harder than I ever thought to go yourself. And there's so many different angles of thought. So I think it's just about, without sounding too textbooky, like, the first is a risk of failure, but also learning how to prioritize time. Time is such a valuable asset in everyone's world. But when you're in a startup, and it's my co-founder and I now, there's only a limited amount of time in the day. And you've got to get to a point where you can get to bed at night and not have that, like, oh my word, I've got a million things. Did I apply for that? Did I do this grant? Didn't email that person. Oh, flip, that customer's waiting for this. So how do you manage that? And how do you get comfortable with ambiguity? That is the biggest challenge in the startup. Like, how do I be comfortable that it's not going to be perfect? Apple releases updates every 2 weeks. Uber releases new features all the time. It's this constant iteration. There's not going to be a perfect. It's not like a legal document that's perfectly done and signed and dotted off. No. being comfortable with ambiguity and learning that like sometimes failure is good to get to the next step. So that's the worst. Well, sorry, not the worst part. That's the biggest challenge.
That's challenge. Yeah.
The best part about it in this liberating journey of being a startup founder now, which is amazing. Like I never thought myself would be in this. Well, I always wanted to, but like now that we're 8 months down the line, we've just closed our first fundraising round. Things are real
Congrats.
now. It's like, yeah, thanks. Another discussion for another day, but it's tough. But when people start believing in you, it's good when you've got people that like back your idea, know that they're putting something into you and they invested in you as a person, because at this early stage it's really about that. That means a lot. So you've got people that back you, and also that feeling of like, I actually wish there was more time. Like, so it could be a Friday night and I'm like, flip, I actually wish I could have 2 more hours just to do these things because I want to get this done. I want to make it happen. So this liberating feeling of like being in control of your day and knowing that you're doing something that is going to make a greater impact on society, hopefully, because whatever the stats say, something like 90% of startups fail, or whatever the case may be, those are always going to be against you. So just keep sticking to your guns and knowing that, like, embrace the highs when it's high times. And Marcus, I'm sure you've seen this. When you get like a yes from an investor or a customer, it's like, oh my word, this is amazing. Enjoy those moments, because the next call, you're going to have someone being like, this is the worst idea. It's not going to work. Like, what are you guys doing? And
it's a roller coaster, up and down. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess learning to control those emotions.
No, and I agree with both. And like you said, time management, I think, is an undervalued skill that which we talked about more at business school, right? I think you start developing that with the craziness of business school, but it's one of the things that in the startup world, it's a must to master. So Bartek, I know we're running out of time, so maybe the last thing to leave us on, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now, what the startup is. Congrats on the fundraising round. So maybe just share a little bit about what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I can just try relate it more to the MBA experience and where we are. I mean, I'm always happy to talk further about a startup. It's called Levra, and we coach young adults on interpersonal communication skills. And we're using innovative technologies such as virtual reality to actually immerse people into this gamified experiential learning. And we live in a world today of like TikTok and Snapchat and all these fast bursts of learning, especially for the young adults. Let's give them that training that they actually learned they used to. So that's a bit of a high level. But where this is important from an MBA experience is that it started during the MBA as an entrepreneurship project. So
Wow,
Business School allowed us the opportunity to have something called EP, or entrepreneurship project. You get into teams of 5s and you can come up with any idea. Some people had cat cafes, some people had crypto wallets, some people had whatever the case may be. And we had like a pitching night where you could go pitch your idea. I pitched the idea of like education, bridging the gap between university students and the professional working world, because there's such a skills gap there. I got together a brilliant team. My first member was my now co-founder, Emily, who's a previous lawyer at Clifford Chance, and she had seen this problem in her experience too. And it allowed us to actually research during the MBA, hypothesize, test that hypothesis, and actually formulate a business case. And that's where it all worked. It all started from the MBA, and we've decided post-MBA to take it full-time, just 2 of us, and utilize a lot of the MBA contacts. We've actually got a decent amount of investment from the current MBA, or the MBAs are our friends. We've got a lot of them that have helped us with marketing and strategies around sales and strategies around educational technologies. So using that network practically, it was amazing. And then just the wider Oxford network, which is like what we just come from. So, it's literally, it's not really like an Oxford spin out, but it is, because although we're not using like research and IP from Oxford, like it's come out of the MBA, and that's a really cool story. And we've chatted to a lot of these MBAs in the current year. Take it seriously, because you never know what is going to happen in your MBA year. I now find myself working with Emily, who I met during the MBA, as my co-founder, and we're on this exciting journey together of Levra, and that wouldn't have happened if I didn't do the MBA. So did I meet my objectives? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I say this to anyone pursuing their MBA. So I'll leave both of you guys with one last comment, which maybe any tips you would give to maybe a prospective MBA. One I give to any current MBA student is, listen, you're not making money right now. Yes, you're busy with other things, but start working on a project. Pick something with a classmate and just start working on it. Right? It's the best time to do it. You have people all around you. If you're like, hey, I want to do a new software for consultants. Okay, well, you probably have at least 10 people in your class. There are previous consultants. Go interview them. Go interview their bosses, right? Like you have so many people around you where you can test ideas. You have the time, you have the framework, you have professors that can even help you push it along. So, Bartek, I 100% agree. You should really leverage an MBA experience during the time to do that. But with that said, but maybe both you guys give maybe a last sort of comment or suggestion maybe on to either pre-MBAs or current MBAs on just helpful tips or things you wish you would have known.
I think for pre and current MBAs, I would give 2 tips from this podcast. First, be authentic. As you can see from Bartek, that's definitely a magnet from our other classmates. Do not pretend or try to be somewhere like you are not. Authenticity is super important. And number 2, challenge yourself outside of the program. Do not stick to going to classes and finding a job. In my case, I had the WMBA experience, which also taught me a lot about entrepreneurship. It was crazy. We talked about it that podcast with the LBS student. I think the most valuable part is right here, right now, which is meeting Bartek and people from all over universities. With otherwise, I wouldn't have 0 chances of meeting if we didn't do that project. So yes, try to push yourself outside of the classes and find a job. Do something else. Not necessarily it has to be like the best project, anything you want, but there's definitely, as you were talking about time management, some spare and time capacity for you to push yourself out of the classes and find a job.
Yeah, cool, brilliant. And I guess for me to sum it up, I'll try be as simple as possible. So pre-MBA students, if you're thinking about it, just do it. In the famous words of Nike, I guess. Go for it. It is the best year of your life. If you're already thinking about it, that means you have to do it. Current MBA students, embrace the now. Of course, there's going to be different times, but make the most of that. You've got a network of people that are so brilliant and so ambitious. Make the most of that moment when you're in it. And thirdly, post-MBA, don't forget that you've just gone through this hard work of pre and during. Use that network. And although it might be still practical networks for the first few years of like friends, trips, holiday houses, whatever, which is awesome, in 5 to 10 years' time, all the people that you've done the MBA with are going to be rock stars or leaders in their respective industries. So stay close to that network. Yeah. And yeah, those are my 3 things.
Amazing.
Yeah. Agree with both of y'all's final thoughts. And Bartek, thanks for joining me and Juan Carlos today. It was a pleasure having you on. Maybe we'll have you back on again where you and I can maybe go back and forth on the startup world and what's going on. So appreciate you spending the time with us today.
Me or the audience, I can just be here with some popcorn.
Please, yeah, always happy to.
Guys. When I have some money, we'll talk. Right now.
You can always write a signed commitment. In the future, you can transfer the money.
I can see you guys know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for connecting us, Juan. You've honestly done a great job of connecting.
No, it's my pleasure.
You know, and yeah.
With all honesty, I just had a blast talking to you guys. I learned a lot. I can feel the energy through the room or through the podcast.